All right. Well, welcome back to Freight Nation, a podcast by Truckstop. We appreciate you joining us today. I like to talk about this industry, as you guys know, and this is hopefully why that you come and listen to these great stories about the people that have worked in transportation or beginning their careers in transportation, and they come and give great advice about their lives and their careers. And today I've got somebody joining me on Freight Nation that is an old friend of mine, and in trucking, that's a good thing. That's a great thing to be able to say is you have some old friends in trucking. And I like to think of this as like part of our legend series, like the people that when I started in 1998, that I got to get to know, that I saw them as legends in this marketplace. And there's about 5 or 6 of them that I call legends. And joining me today on Freight Nation is my good friend Dan Doran of the then Ace Doran and now of Diamond Transportation. So Dan, thank you so much for joining me on Freight Nation.
Thank you for having me.
Well, Freight Nation, you may notice I've got my internet truck stop, the old name of truck stop. I know Dan's there smiling about it. So that was, when truck stop started, we were the internet truck stop, and then we took the off, and now we're just truck stop. It used to, so we've evolved too. So all these things, and we'll talk a lot about the evolution of transportation because look, Freight Nation, getting perspective on something, on anything in life is great. Going to that wise counsel it is one of the things that is so important to your career and so important to your operation. Be able to really have trusted, wise counsel, and Dan falls in that category when you're talking about transportation. At least he does for me, because of his perspective and because of his character in this market. And so he's had a great history. He literally was born into trucking. He wasn't born in a truck. I don't mean to say that, but he was born into trucking. So Dan, I'd love for you. The story is always the most fun. When you tell your story about how you got into this, and I know that you've got a great one. So talk about where this whole transportation career started for you in your life.
Again, thanks for having me. And like I said earlier when we were talking, that I was actually kind of born into it. My dad and his family, that was their business from years back when they were growing up and built it into a business. And my dad in 1941 started the company Ace Doran Hauling and Rigging. So when I got to be about 14 years old, and one summer, I was kind of getting under my mom's skin, and I remember her asking my dad, "Don't you have something that he can do with take him to work with you?" And that's how I kind of got the boot out of the house from my mom over the summer because I was uh, probably being a pain in her butt. So I started going to work with my dad, and just started. I started in the office doing this and that and filing papers, and I wound up moving up into the supply room, which was we had at the time 60 or 70 terminals around the country, so they all needed freight bills at the time and paperwork and other supplies. So that all came out of Cincinnati. So that was my next job.
So that was a lot of work before the electronic age, right?
Yeah, a lot of paper, a lot of you look at we always hated when we would get logbooks in by the semi trailer load. That was one of the worst days of the year is when you got the call that the logbooks were sitting at the dock. So because they were heavy and lots of them, and we had to find space for them. And so that was one of my jobs. Running to get the mail, sweeping floors, cutting grass, spraying for weeds around the different properties.
You're doing all the grunt work.
Yeah, and it was funny because my two boys started in the business, and that's how they kind of got their start as well. So spraying spraying weeds, working on trailers, and cutting grass, and doing all that manual labor.
Yeah. So hey, so let me. I love to talk about this on Freight Nation because Dan, your description of you working with your dad and then now your son's working with you is the exact description I've got working with my dad. My dad owned a little steel processing company. We worked out in the warehouse. We ran forklifts. We swept the floors. We took inventory. We were out in the hot warehouse in the summertime and the cold warehouse in the wintertime. And so my dad said, you don't start in the office. You start out where the production is. So the same sort of thing. So, but I gotta ask you, I love to ask this question. What was it like working with your dad?
Well, my dad was bigger than life. He had started this company, and at the time it was 1,000 trucks, and it was all owner operators, and he had a lot of good people.
1,000 trucks. Now that was way back in the day, man.
Yeah, that was before deregulation. That was late 70s. I'm telling my age, but Ace Doran was one of the first owner operator based companies, hauling steel and so forth. There was a lot of regional work, there was some long haul stuff, but most of it was regional and it revolved around the steel industry. But they had built a name in Cincinnati for hauling machine tools and the rigging business and the oversized stuff. So we did a fair amount of that as well.
Yeah, so Ohio based, but you worked all over the lanes that you worked, that you had contracts for during the regulation period.
Right. And then when in 1980, when things were deregulated, then it changed the whole world.
Oh gosh, talk about that because a lot of the people on the probably are listening to Freight Nation have been, joined this industry maybe 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, if it's a long time, maybe 2 years ago. So what was it like when the industry actually deregulated? I know I didn't put that in my notes, but man, that is a great thing to explain. What was that transition like? I mean, you lived it. What was it like going through that?
Well, I was still pretty young. I didn't probably realize the impact. I don't know that anybody really understood it at the time, but there was a lot coming up to that point. There was a lot of effort, a lot of work that went into authorities. So, and you asked this earlier, about the name Ace Dorn. Well, Ace came from a piece of authority that they bought. It was Ace Machinery Movers, and they put the Dorn name with it.
I always wondered that. Yeah, yeah.
Before deregulation, you had to apply to the Interstate Commerce Commission for authority, and you had to prove that there was a need for another carrier in a lane. So your big steel mills had the regular lanes, Chicago to Cleveland, Cleveland, Detroit, Middletown to Detroit, those kind of lanes. And in order to go to work, to get authority, in order to go work for somebody like Armco at the time, you had to get the authority for that lane, and you had to go to the Interstate Commerce Commission in DC, and there was a hearing, and you had to present witnesses, and which would have been the shippers, the shipping, somebody that was the shipping supervisor at Armco or any one of the steel mills had to go and in your support and say, yes, I need another carrier because I can't get enough trucks as it is to move my freight. So just think of all the expense there. All the people that had to go to DC. If it was a 2 or 3 day trial, you had the expense of putting people up and travel, getting them there, getting them home, putting them up while they were there. Lawyers were involved and so forth. And so you had all that expense. So when things were deregulated, now you send an attorney $500 and they got your 48 state authority. And at that time, the states were still regulated. So any intrastate movement you still had to get authority, and you still had to have authority to move from Cincinnati to Cleveland within Ohio, or Indianapolis to East Chicago, or Kentucky. Within Kentucky was a big move at the time. So you had to have the authorities to move within the states. So there's still some regulation even after the deregulation of interstate traffic. So it changed things. There was a lot of, and they were assets. The authorities were assets. The accountants kept track of what you had involved and what you had invested, and that was the cost of your authority. And then it had a value. So if you had $100,000 piece of authority on the books after deregulation, that went to zero. It was a big effect on the financials for a lot of companies.
Right. Yeah, I know that I talked to Noah Perry, who has a great over 4 decade experience in this marketplace, and he's always talking about the top 100 fleets that were around prior to 1980, prior to deregulation, There's only 4 of them left today post deregulation. So obviously deregulation changed how the operational factors, some of the valuation factors of these businesses. What did that do to Ace Doran at the time, and what did you guys do to adjust to it?
Well, it fragmented the business. So a lot of our large fleet owners saw the opportunity to go get their own authority and become their own carrier. So you take a fleet owner with 30 or 40 trucks, and now all of a sudden that truck count, that capacity, those customers, it all left and went somewhere else. So there was a big adjustment in revenue and size and truck count. I think we probably by 1984 we were probably in this 500 or 600 truck range. So the size was cut in half basically. So it took time, but it fragmented the business because it was a lot easier to get in the industry. And if a fleet owner or an agent had a good relationship with a customer or a shipper, they went to them and said, "Hey, I'm going to get my own authority. If you'll support me, I'll be providing the same service on the same trucks. It's just you're going to be paying somebody different."
Well, that's fantastic. So, Freight Nation, you can see where deregulation changed everything, and it opened the doors for people that wanted to start a business and get into this business. No longer did they have to go and do what Dan was describing about going to DC, and really, if you didn't have the ability and have money, a decent amount of money at that time, and good support, you were going to have a difficult time getting into the trucking industry. But in today's marketplace, there's almost no barrier to it. So that's made it a good thing. It's made it a challenging thing, right, Dan? I mean, there's been some challenges. So what would you say has been like the number one sort of benefit of deregulation? And then what's been the challenge of deregulation? And then I want to jump into sort of like the modernization, the current modernization of the overall freight marketplace.
Now, the number one challenge is the competition and the fragmentation of the business. So instead of having 10 big carriers and all the trucks are working under those 10 carriers, now you probably have 200. So, and I think in a way that's kind of lent itself to the brokerage, to the rise of the brokerage business.
Oh, I would think, sure, for sure it has. Yeah.
And Ace Doran got its brokerage authority in 1988, I believe, was one of the first carriers to apply for it.
Yeah, it was really early, super early.
But that kind of was a result and kind of supported the fragmentation. So rather than have 5 carriers knocking on a shipper's door, now they got 50. And the traffic departments and the big shipping and the big mills and the big manufacturers kind of lost their meaning because they didn't have to support the applications for authority, and that it wasn't as formal of a process. Everybody had authority, and now you got all these people knocking on your door, and they don't want the guy sitting in the shipping office doesn't want to answer 50 phone calls or make 50 phone calls every morning to find trucks. He wants to make one phone call or 2 phone calls and move on to the rest of his duties. That's where the brokers kind of step in.
Yeah, hold that on brokers, but that answers a really big question to me. I always wondered why, out of the say roughly 4 million shippers that are out there in today's marketplace, only about 15% of them can even move their own freight or desire to move their own freight, and they trust everybody else for it. Well, that makes a lot of sense. The competition out there, when it's just a cost for somebody to move their goods to market, if you've got 50 people fighting for it and they can give you good efficiency, why do you need the department? That answers a big question. I want to back up a second though, because I want to you took over at Ace Doran, and it was a $11 million company with 100 trucks, and your leadership was there for more than 2 decades, and you grew it in a very healthy way. So, you took it over, so when your dad before deregulation had 1,000 trucks, after deregulation, you guys were going down because you said it was fragmented, 500 trucks, 500 to 600 trucks, and then when you took it over, it was 100 trucks. So, what got it to the 100 trucks, and then what was in your mind where you said, "Okay, this is what I need to do to grow this business back to the health that you wanted it to be at. So talk to the Freight Nation watchers and listeners, because this is good, Freight Nation, because this is like you're inside the mind of somebody who's been through it all. He's been through it, regulation. He's been through it where it changed, and then where it's, it's a family business working with his dad. So this is a big one. So listen up, what Dan says on this one. So what was in your brain? What happened, and then what was in your brain to get it to where it needed to get?
Well, there was several things, and we just talked about a lot of it. The deregulation was a big part of it. It continued to fragment the industry, and the industry was changing, and there was brokerage was starting to become a thing. So that all kind of changed the structure of carriers, and I mean, even to the point where I remember when I started the big steel mills, you had to have a physical office within, I don't know, 15 or 20 miles of their facility.
It's kind of like modern Bentonville, Northwest Arkansas today. You've got all these manufacturers have offices within a few miles of Walmart and Tyson Chicken and people that are up in that area of the country.
Yeah, and you because everybody congregated at a facility. So all the drivers, this is before cell phones. This drivers and trucks would come to a dispatch office and they hung out there until they got a load to go somewhere else, right? So you had to have a facility, an office in all these locations. Well, with the advent of brokerage and computers and cell phones, that all went away. So now there's people on the West Coast moving freight out of, the middle of Ohio, and you don't know how they got it. Like they got a salesman that knows somebody or is some history or whatever the case may be. So the all those things took its toll on the old businesses, the old traditional trucking companies. So you you have to change, you have to adapt to keep up. So that and my dad's health was suffering. He started failing in the late 80s, early 90s. Went through a rough stretch where the he was the guy. He made the decisions, and he didn't want to give it up. It was hard on the company. So there were six of us. I'm the youngest of six. So and there's 26 years between the myself and the oldest, and so it came down to us kids whether we wanted to keep it going or not. So we decided to try and keep it going for a while because my mom was still alive, and we wanted to try and support her and keep it going to make sure she had she had an income or some support. So we kept it going and started building a team. Started building, I started with the people that were there that I could trust, and built on that. That led to other people and opportunities when other companies, um, some of the older names were falling off the wayside. The Heck Millers and the Dallas and Mavis companies. So we built a team of people, added agents, developed the system, added trucks, and just kept building on you find good people and they attract good people, and you once you get to a certain point they start coming to you. It's less work. So I was fortunate to have a good team and a lot of loyal people around me that helped us get it back up to speed and made it successful and took it as far as we could take it.
Yeah. And so you were predominantly moving specialized freight, or what was the focus of your freight? And then I want to shift into how you started growing your, how supplementing or growing your business through the addition of your brokerage.
Well, there was a good portion of it was specialized, but not anywhere near most of it. So the biggest part of it was the steel commodities and flatbed freight. but we did a fair portion of the, the caterpillars and the machine tools and that sort of thing. But the bulk of it was the steel industry.
Right. So open deck, it could have been rebar, cold rolled steel, coils of steel, things like that. Look, I'll never forget the day my dad said, "Hey, I've got a big coil of steel coming in." And I went, "Well, what's big?" He goes, "Well, it's 30,000 pounds." How does that get on a truck? He goes, "Don't worry about that." He goes, "Go over to the where there was a we were at a big industrial complex and our neighbor company next to us had a giant forklift that could lift 40,000 pounds." And he goes, "Yeah, just get on the forklift and just get it off the truck and get it onto the dock so we can get it over the machine." I'm like, I was scared to death. Yeah, but me and my brother Randy, my older brother, my dad always taught us, "Hey, somebody else has done it before you. Go figure it out. You can figure it out." And he goes, "It's really not. It's not rocket science. Getting a coil off the truck. Just be careful." So we moved a lot of that stuff, plate steel, rebar, coils, mostly coils because we split them into different sizes for manufacturers. So that's fascinating. You and I have that in common. So you guys were moving a lot of open deck kind of stuff, and that was really your focus because of where you were in Ohio.
Yeah, pretty much so. Location lent itself, but most of our agents and company offices were in Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky, Illinois.
Industrialized part of America where it's things that make other things. So you took the company from 11 million to 60 million, from 100 trucks to 400 trucks. So that's a big accomplishment, So you talked about number one, and this is really important, Freight Nation. You talked about having really good teammates and hiring really good people. And then you talked about really looking at it in how things were modernizing. In other words, how can you be more efficient with the movement of your paperwork and communication, that sort of stuff. So talk a little bit about, as that sort of started changing things, really what you started to invest your focus in to serve the customer better.
Well, even going back to my dad, he was a big proponent of computers and what computers could do. So we had an IBM AS400 system back from the time that I can remember working there. We had one whole room, the sizable size room took up the whole computer took it up. So, and now you can do more on a laptop on your desktop than probably that computer could do. But so going back even then, I do remember trucking has always been a paperwork intensive business. The freight bills, every freight bill had 9 parts and it got split up. Each department had its own copy, and then you had 3 or 4 pages of shipping order and weight receipts and maybe permits to go. So you had a stack of, you had a book for almost each load. But so I can remember first hearing about imaging and what you could do with that. So trying to get that implemented into our company and into our system and get people to buy into it and be comfortable was probably one of the biggest jumps of faith. At the time, Landstar had a system and some other people were using it. And then there was a guy that had kind of split off of that and started his own system. And that's what we kind of took as our first step. So
Do you remember the name of that system?
if I heard it, I'd probably recognize it. I want to say Pegasus.
Oh yeah, Pegasus Transtech.
Yeah.
That was
I think
Bob Helms.
I think
Bob
that,
Helms, good guy.
I think was that Landstar's system maybe?
He lived down in the same area, so I didn't know it was connected to it, but it wouldn't surprise me.
I think that may have been like the first system. I'm not sure that's what. I don't remember. If you give me some time and maybe by the end of the interview I'll remember it, but I don't think that was the name of it. But I remember the lady who took care of all our paperwork and the look on her face when we explained to her what we were getting ready to do, and it was the uncertainty and the change and the being uncomfortable with something new. But God bless her, she got the hang of it and she became a pro at it. If you needed to find a piece of paper, she knew exactly where it was, and that's something to say for that much paper going through it. So
Well, Pegasus Transtech was definitely Pegasus was definitely an imaging company. So, I knew 'em well. So the modernization of your operation, how did that help you guys grow?
I'm not sure it helped us grow. It helped us become more efficient, um, and do more with the same number of people. So in a sense, I guess maybe that allowed us to grow because people could do more. But the brokerage, like I said, late '80s when A Storm got its brokerage authority, and it was, there was we were all owner operators, all a lot of large agent business, and a lot of those people aren't comfortable turning their customer over to somebody else.
Yeah, you know they are. A good when a good agent leaves, so does the customer database, and that's why, CRMs, customer management systems have become so popular because the company can keep their data, so absolutely, yep, yep. It's one of the st it's still a big problem, yeah.
There's the data, but there's also the personal side of it. There's the relationship
Oh, well, absolutely, yeah. That's without a doubt in our industry, yeah.
that's hard to replicate. But the brokerage business kind of, with computers, kind of helped the our brokerage business grow. You were becoming Freight was becoming more decentralized. I'll call it. It was You didn't have to be 20 miles from somebody to get freight from them.
Right, right.
So we always struggled to get it over a certain point, and some of that was by design. We didn't want to have the perception that we were brokering freight before we were given our owner operators the opportunity to.
Yeah, well, yeah, taking care of the home team, yeah.
So we kind of kept a lid on it for that reason. And it was a part of our business and was for a long time. Never became a majority of our business. It was probably 15% of our business at the most.
Not uncommon at that time that it was around 15% because the marketplace itself is still establishing itself. So in the modern marketplace, so you got to a point of operation and I'm guessing were your family members still involved while you were the president? Okay. So you guys got to a point in the after 2010 where you were starting to think about what's next for the business and you guys got to a point of thinking, okay, maybe it might be right to sell the business to somebody. How did that become part of the conversation? How did you guys get to a decision point? And then what was it like going through selling the business that you literally grew up in?
Well, that was tough. I mean, it was something my dad had started. He gave birth to it basically. It was something that in the back of your mind is, am I going to be able to face him the next time I see him, do this? But
Now, was he still alive when you guys we sold the business?
no, he passed
Oh,
away in 1992. Well, like I said before, I was the youngest of six. Um, we had just gone through, there was a big challenge in '99 and 2000. Just about every steel mill had filed bankruptcy in the year 2000. So that was a strain on the business. But as you go along with partners, things are always a challenge. And when it's family members, it's even more challenging.
so much harder. Yeah.
So me being the youngest, and there was, like I said, 26 years between myself and the oldest. It was, and we started getting into the challenge with the banks. Financially, the banks were starting to tighten up credit and lines of credit, and wanted more collateral and so forth. And so it all started to take a strain on the family. And finally, it was like, maybe we ought to just try and find somebody. And we looked for quite a while. We went through all the big players, um, and it wound up selling in 2013. So
I know a little bit what that's about selling a business and then waking up the next day going, what am I supposed to do now? So you take some time off after you sold it or did you transition right into something else
I actually stayed on for a couple of years. I was part of the deal.
and operated it? Yep. It's usually the workout, how it works out. So for continuity. But there came a day when you said, "All right, it's time for me to move on to the next season of what Dan Doran's gonna do." And so did you take any time off, or did you, like, just say, "Nope, I'm gonna transition to something else?" That's kinda how I've operated. But, so what was your thought process? I just want the Freight Nation watchers and listeners to hear this, because one day they might be faced with it, whether it's at a small level or a big level, it's still sort of the same emotional feeling.
Right. It was very emotional because, like I said, it was a family business. My brothers and sisters were involved. My kids were involved. It was something my dad had started. So there was a lot of emotion, but at the end of the day, it was best for the company, and the company still operates. And
I was gonna say, sounds like you protected the business and the people that worked at the business by, breathing some new life into it. And sometimes you have to do it in a way, you might not have wanted to do it that way, but it was the best way to do it.
still has a good name, and I'm sure my dad would be proud of that. That it's still
You know he would. What's your dad's name?
Robert.
Robert. Okay, I knew Robert would be. I'm sure he'd be proud of it. So, all right, so you did your workout with for a couple years, and then did you transition to working for another carrier, or what was your next part, your next journey in transportation?
Yeah, I took some time off. At the time, I was in the succession, the chairs for, was actually right in the middle of my chairman year at the Ohio Trucking Association.
Yeah. I was gonna make sure I ask you about your leadership stuff with the associations, both the Ohio Trucking Association and TCA.
Yeah, and I was actually in the middle of a 2-year term as chairman there, and then I was also in the officers group at the TCA. So I had to tell those people what was going on and so forth. And I was approached by the folks at a friend of mine at Bison, and they wanted to do something in the states. So after it took a few months and started to work for them. They uh, they wanted some sales help in the states for cross border traffic and so forth, and then wound up they wanted to try starting up a flatbed operation in the states, and it was a challenge. So, but that's what attracted me to it. It was the challenge of it. So it we did that for 3 years and ran it right into COVID, and that's where it ended.
And then you transitioned into working, was that when you went to into working for Diamond?
Well, I just started at Diamond here recently, since the first of the year, and I've known John Coca and I've known Diamond from back from many years from the Machinery Haulers Association, and got involved in that several years ago, and got to know. It was actually before John took the company over, but got to know John, kind of saw him come in to the association and got to know him a little bit. So John, John's looking for, we want to try and build a flatbed and step deck division, or some traffic to complement what they're already doing with RGNs. They're already moving the big machines, and there's a lot of fall off freight, a lot of flatbed freight, a lot of step deck freight that associates with those machines, and a lot of inbound material into the same plants that they're already hauling out of. So we're trying to build a group of agents and a group of trucks to service that part of it.
Right. So you bring a legacy. This is why I call it the Legend Series, Freight Nation. He brings a legacy of growing up at 14 years old and his mom kicking him out of the out of the house and saying, "Go to work with your dad in the trucking business." And so you started learning, and your dad really put you in the place where you could learn, the value, as my dad used to say, the value of honest work. He said, "Look, all honest work has a merit." He said, "So just go do it really well." And so you grew up and into that all the way to taking over the business and running it with your family members, which is even more challenging and learning and growing and endearing. And then you guys made the decision to sustain the company by letting somebody else own it and run it, which good, that keeps a legacy going there. And then you tried to help one of the really great fleets in North America, Bison. I know the guys, Rob and the guys up there, great fleet that's there. And then you're now working at Diamond, heading business development for them, bringing all that legacy, all that executive leadership, and all that, kind of working as a team to Diamond. And so, where do you see the opportunity for you to grow Diamond? I know you talked about the agents and the trucks, but I mean, like, there's a uniqueness about every transportation company. So, where do you see the opportunity there?
Well, on the flatbed side and the step deck side, there's, like I say, they have a front row seat to a lot of freight that's associated with the machines they're already moving. There's a lot of parts loads, there's a lot of accessories and fallout loads associated with some of those big machines, and also the steel industry supplies the big manufacturers like that. They a lot of those parts are come in a sheet and they're bent, as well as I do, bent and rolled and formed into parts, and that's a whole another side of that market and those customers. There's an opportunity there, and it's all in the lanes, the same lanes, basically that we're already servicing with the big trucks, the RGNs, the double drops, and so forth. So that's the opportunity.
One of the great things, Freight Nation, I love about Dan is wherever he is, he brings his passion into creating excellence wherever he is. And it's one of the reasons why whenever I see him at either the TCA show or the ATA show, wherever I see him, I always try to get a few minutes with him just to like listen to the wisdom and listen to his point of view, because you don't get this a lot in any industry that you're in. And so when you get an opportunity to learn from somebody who's done it, been there, and can tell you what potholes not to step in, and do a little more of this and maybe a little less of that. That's the counsel that you need. And so, all right, so Dan, last couple questions, and then we'll wrap it up for this session of Freight Nation. All right, so you've seen a lot. You've seen, man, before deregulation, you've seen after deregulation, you've seen the growing a fleet back to the profitability you want after it had a heyday in another different type of marketplace. You've seen modernization, or the computerization, the digitization of our industry. What, for the Freight Nation watchers and listeners, where would you tell them to invest most of their time?
I have to say, don't lose sight of the networking and the personal side of this business. There's and one thing I've noticed with I'll call them younger people, much like yourself.
I'm not that much younger than you, pal. So,
They get comfortable with not leaving the office and getting done what they have to do, and I understand it because there's a lot more demands on families today. Kids' activities, both parents are working, but not to lose sight of the personal the relationships that come from networking, and just like our conversation. And I was trying to think of where you and I first met, and it had to have been Mid America when you were
I think it was Mid America. Yeah,
at Overdrive.
that's right. That's right. It was. Yeah.
But that those relationships, and I've made a lot of friends in this business. We compete day to day, but we go to these association meetings or we go to the truck shows, and there's a lot of camaraderie as well, because we're trying to do things. We're trying to make the industry better. We're trying to get our voice out there and trying to make Washington or Washington understand our issues, or we're trying to make the drivers understand why we would be a good place to work or sign on their truck, or become part of in some way. I was listening when I was getting ready for sign on here. I was listening to some of your old broadcasts and your interview with uh, the Brenny people,
Oh yeah, yeah. Joyce Brenny, yeah, fantastic. Yeah.
and her comment was, it's hard for her to tell people about themselves because they are themselves. You don't understand how well you do things because you're consumed with what you're doing. But once you get out and you see other people and get associated and you start to understand, well, we're doing that already. We've been doing that for 10 years. And, I'm so glad that we don't have those issues. That all relates. One of the biggest, and probably you don't want to hear his name, but Marvin Shesky.
I do remember Martin Shefsky.
Marvin Shesky had the talent of talking to you at the truck show and picking out, at least to me, he picked out, you should be telling that. That should be in your ad. I thought, well, yeah, you're right. I mean, and it came down to three things, revenue per mile and all owner operators and something else in that mix. But that's what we drove home. So, but you don't get those wisdoms like you mentioned from if you're not out there talking to people and associating with them.
Well, man, what great advice! What a great advice to end on there. So, Freight Nation, from Dan's point of view and mine too, bring your passion to it. Uh, the relationship is the most powerful thing you have, and you got to use your feet to go get it. So you got to go be present to go get it. Dan, man, thank you so much for your wisdom today. As always, I just cherish being hearing from you and being with you. And thank you so much for spreading your message and spreading what's good about trucking to everyone's out there on Freight Nation. So thank you so much for being a guest.
Well, I appreciate you getting me involved. I'm glad to be a part of it.
Well, this industry's better because of you. So thank you so much. So Freight Nation, that's a wrap. Appreciate you joining us today. I know you got a lot from this episode. Man, what a history just to be able to pay attention to, learn from. So to learn from a legend in the industry. And so we're so thankful that Dan could be on today. But thank you for joining us for Freight Nation for another episode. We hope this has been a great value to you and to your operation. And let us know how we can continue to help you improve. And as we like to say at Freight Nation, don't forget to work hard, to be kind, and to stay humble. Thanks a lot, Freight Nation. We'll catch you the next time. On behalf of the Truckstop team, thanks for listening to this episode of Freight Nation. To find out more about the show, head to truckstop.com/podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Until then, keep on trucking and exploring the open roads with Freight Nation, a trucking podcast.